Hello, everyone. Oh, welcome. Oh, it's the news hour. I don't need these, actually, because I don't have to hear anything. I just gotta talk to y'all, which is fine. Hello, everyone. My name is Cameron Cowan. Welcome to the Cameron Journal News Hour. It's been a week since I last talked to y'all. Oh, my goodness. So, a lot's been going on. I had talked a little bit last week about mental health struggles that I was going through and all this type of thing. And unfortunately, that was the peak last week, and it went downhill from there. The culmination of which was that I lost an important hub that powers my whole studio on Thursday night. So when I'm talking to you, I have a big monitor over here. I really use my MacBook Pro kind of like a Mac Studio because they give you two USB-C plugs. I'm using three things right now, none of whom have USB-C plugs. So I have a hub that kind of connects everything together, makes everything easier, more functional, because I have a microphone, a camera, I have an external hard drive, I have, other stuff, and I also have to power the studio lights and different things. So it's complicated. It's not that much in volume, but you have to put it all together. Well, these hubs wear out, and the last time I bought one was about 3 years ago, and these hubs, they run 24/7 for a long, long time, and eventually they wear out. And so I was working on Thursday night, and I've been having some issues with keeping my hard drives connected. I've been having some other issues, and Thursday night it just all fell apart. So I had no real ability to work on Friday or Saturday. I was super tired and exhausted emotionally. Physically, some things have been happening with business stuff during the week. Um, and I was just exhausted. I just took the weekend. I didn't write the newsletter on Saturday, so if you're wondering where the newsletter was, we'll catch up this week. And so it's just been crazy, and it's the end of the month. Today's the last day of March, and it's just been a little crazy. And I've been, working on a bunch of things and being very productive and whatnot. And it's just the wheels just kind of fell off the wagon emotionally, technologically, all this type of thing. And so we're crashing into Monday a little bit. Today has evaporated. I was up on time, and I have been on emails, on phone calls. I've done a bunch of things. I've solved a bunch of problems, but the day has just evaporated. Like, I was like, oh, it's 6:15. I'm gonna have a little lie down before I do the news hour, and then it was time to get up and put my face on and pull it together and do this and all this sort of thing. So it's been crazy. It's been a crazy day. It's been a crazy week, and um, it's just been a lot going on, a lot happening. And so we have only a few news stories today. We're gonna get through them all. We're gonna get out of here, because I need to take a break and think and reevaluate and get some writing done. And I have new content to publish, but we don't have a lot of content for April. I was supposed to edit the next batch of podcast episodes this weekend. That didn't happen. So it's it's a lot. It's a lot because it's a lot. It's being a solo content creator has a lot of moving parts, and so it's been a crazy week since I saw you last. I'm hoping this week's gonna be a little bit more sedate. Um, and but my hub is new. So, and let's not even mention how expensive all of this is. I mean, there was a lot of money going out the door and all this type of thing. But we're ever so grateful that we were able to afford to do it. We always have to be grateful when life's emergencies happen and you have the resources to pay for it, to be grateful for that. I'm also getting ready for tax season because taxes are due in a couple weeks, and I know I have all my paperwork together now, and so there's just so much. It's just a lot happening. So it's a lot of moving parts. So welcome to the news hour. Welcome to the Cameron Roll News Hour. It's been a busy week in my life, but it has not been a quiet week in the headlines. There's kind of two things I want to talk about before we get into stories, and one is the left wing influencer Henry Sisson. So you may have heard about this story. So there's this left wing commentator, young guy. He's 22, white, good looking, named Henry Sisson, and he got in trouble because he was texting and exchanging photos consensually with of age women, but there were 11 of them at once, and people are saying he was manipulative, in dealing with these women, and made them think that they were the only one when there was 11, of them going at one point, and all this sort of thing. And the discourse has been rather interesting, including a lot of guys on Twitter being like, the left should let guys, be sleazy again. I mean, honestly, the whole kind of story is like 22-year-old has, is sexting multiple women, tape at 11. I mean, this is normal 22-year-old guy behavior. And I kind of, laughed with friends. I said, it's a thank God no one ever found out about some of the shit we used to do back in the day. Because, oh boy, if this is, if this is a thing, then they would have never been able to survive what we got up to. But this is one of the sort of tempest in a teapot type of stories, that becomes discourse online, but really doesn't matter, other than the fact that he did get dropped by his PR agency. And I did write them to see if they would represent me. I'm kind of like, oh, that's a lead, and take advantage where you can get it. But it's just this whole this is such a tempest in a teapot story of, people kind of criticizing someone for not doing anything illegal or bad, but not necessarily behaving in the new socially approved way. Honestly, I think the problem is it kind of demonstrates, kind of in a nutshell, in a teapot, this sort of ideas about a lot of the stuff between, the left and the right, and a certain sort of puritanical idea about sex. I mean, on the right, this is a non-story. On the left, it's the only reason it's a story is because there's, we've had all this thought and dialogue about toxic masculinity and, all this sort of thing. And, how, men are awful. Men only want one thing and it's disgusting, this sort of thing. But there's, I think, also, changing social mores about a lot of this stuff. And, because of social media, transgressing those social norms comes with a lot higher cost than it used to. But this guy's going to be fine. The dialogue about it is interesting, but I think there is a kind of a point to be made that if the left wants to remain politically relevant, criticizing young men for being young men, and being, sexually active with young women who are of age, is not the hill you want to die on. And that, if you are at this juxtaposition with the Democratic Party is trying to reach out to young men, and he was supposed to be, the face of the new DNC reach out to young men, and then he gets lampooned on social media for doing what young men do. I mean, again, people would be very shooketh by some of the things some of us were up to in like 2007. Or 1997 for my Gen X friends, or 1987 or 77 for my boomer listeners. That's a very difficult, a very difficult thing, and I think you have to let young men be young men in a sane way. And so it's just, yes, this Tempest in a Teapot story. Speaking of Tempest in Teapot stories, although this one isn't quite as mundane, is the Tesla protests and attacks. So if you're not aware of this story, I wouldn't be surprised. The coverage of it has been uneven. The right wing has really seized upon the people who are attacking, keying, burning down Tesla dealerships. There was a bomb threat at one point. And I in my notes for this, I put in, I said, it's really burning down Elon. And people in their zeal to protest Elon Musk's seeming takeover of our government, they are attacking Tesla products and chargers wherever wherever they can be found. And, the criticism, they're an American company and Elon's doing great for America. Why are people, attacking you? And on top of that, it's mostly Democrats that own Teslas. Why, are these people attacking, their fellow ideologues because they drive the wrong type of car, all this sort of thing. And like I said, this has been the story of the whole Elon, the whole story of the Tesla protests and Elon Musk has been much more covered on the right than it has been on the left for obvious reasons. It's politically expedient narrative wise for the right. It doesn't move the needle on the left. And that it's a very interesting sort of thing. Um, I think I think the frustration against Elon is real and understandable. I find him very frustrating. I found him insufferable for a long time. I've been anti-Tesla for years and years because the cars are crap. So as far as I'm concerned, the more of them that end up in a junkyard, the better. Where hopefully they don't light on fire and have to be dunked in a vat of water in order to be put out, or covered in foam for weeks in the hopes that it might go out. I don't necessarily mind all of that. What I think the greater point is Elon, and this I think kind of gets into Tesla shares and Tesla as an investment, and why the board is working on asking Elon to step down. Is that Elon has been so his political career and life has made him, and by extension the brand for whom he's been the face of, so toxic that there are liberal Democrats getting rid of their cars. There are people selling their Teslas. The used market for Tesla right now is basically zero. You can't sell the cars because there's too many in the market. They never had a great resale value anyway, but there's now so many you can't hardly give one away. And he's made to a certain large segment of the population who was his core customer, he has made that brand entirely toxic. Now, is he going to be able to replace those customers with Republicans? I don't think so. The F-150 pickup truck crowd is not going to dash on and buy a Tesla. And the Cybertruck's getting recalled because the fascia is glued on and falls off. This is an example of what is kind of wrong with that whole car company, which is really a computer company that makes cars. um quote unquote cars. And this is, this is kind of where we where we stand. I don't have a moral opinion on protesting Elon. I don't think destroying Tesla products who are owned by private people, who incidentally are probably Democrats, is necessarily the most effective protest, but I understand where it's coming from. I understand why people are parking unnecessarily in front of charging stations and just trying to make Tesla owners' lives difficult. And I realize for the right, this is a huge, it's a huge narrative talking point of, see, the crazy Democrats are off doing crazy things again and against their own people because their own people own Teslas and all this sort of thing. And it is kind of funny to watch this switch before the election. Teslas were the electric car, they're evil, they're terrible, that's, libtard, all this type of thing. And now that Elon's in power and Trump is like, yep, great cars, we're gonna get one for the White House. I mean, I can't drive it because I'm the president, but we'll have other people drive it, sort of thing. Now all of a sudden, Elon's a good, great quality American and Teslas are great American cars and, sort of thing. It's kind of funny how political narratives can shift consumer habits so quickly. Not that that's new. It's not at all. But in this case, it's kind of interesting how fast the switch has happened, and to such severity. I think that is incredibly interesting and incredibly fascinating. I don't think it's necessarily a good thing to be doing because you have destruction of private property is not something I'm ever terribly a huge fan of, but I certainly understand why people are doing it, and I don't think Elon is necessarily doing our government any favors, especially with the indiscriminate firing, the indiscriminate changes in budget, the way things have just kind of been wholesale gotten rid of. And we've talked about that on the show many times. Last week we talked about, Elon and Doge, and we've covered that off and on. I do have a news story today we're going to talk about his investments with China, which I think is very interesting. But yeah, so let's turn to the headlines. Let me do that. And let me do this here video. There we go. All right, quick drink. I'm going to cover this story first because I promised Brianna Wu on Twitter I would. So this is a very sad story, and I'm not gonna scroll down, and I'll tell you why. In one of the first replies to this tweet is a very violent video, and that's not good for YouTube. The live would get shut down. And it's not, I also upload these to YouTube afterwards and other platforms, and everything would get taken down and demonetized. So we're not going to scroll down. We're not scrolling down. But I think this young man's death is very important to highlight. Let's read together. Let me put my glasses on. I can't see a thing. Hamas militias have killed 22-year-old Odai Nasser Saidi, one of the leaders of the anti-Hamas protest movement in Gaza. That's right, anti-Hamas protest movement in Gaza. He was kidnapped, tortured for 4 hours, and then executed. His body was dumped at the doorstep of his family's home with a chilling message: "This is the price for those who criticize Hamas." Now, besides to stick it to Brianna Wu, who says this stuff never gets covered, I wanted to highlight this. And again, we cannot scroll down. We cannot scroll down. But I wanted to highlight something that I think a lot of people don't understand. A lot of people think that the average Palestinian goes along with everything Hamas does because you see that survey, 80% of Palestinians agree with Hamas. No. And I think people also don't realize that there's some Palestinians, a non-zero amount, that are not huge fans of Hamas either. But much like cartels in Mexico, when someone speaks out, it can be deadly. Now, that's not necessarily a reason not to speak out. This man knew what happened. This young man knew what the possibilities were, and he spoke out anyway. He's a hero. He's a hero for his people. He's a hero for civilization against an organization of thugs who should be wiped off the face of the planet. And I get very incensed, as I did today on Twitter, when someone says that just because you are standing with the Palestinian people, that means you're standing with Hamas. No, I stand with this guy, Mr. Saadi, who knows Hamas is awful, and who knows that Palestinians deserve a better, fairer voice that does not engage in terrible violence like they do. This is who we should be standing with, everyone. This is a true hero who, in spite of knowing that this could happen, and how terrible and traumatic it must be for his family, he stood up anyway. The end of his life was horrible. Unimaginable terror, rended him by his countrymen because he did not agree with their program of terror. How many of us would be brave enough to do that? This is who we're standing with. And this man is a hero, and his story should be told over and over and over again. Now, again, the violent video, we're not scrolling down. And I don't want to see the replies anyway, because the focus should be on Odai and his life, and what he gave his life for his countrymen and women, and the people around him and his family. And I can only imagine what he went through in the end of his life. But he spoke out against Hamas, and he spoke out for actual people who want to live their lives in peace. And I'm covering this right now at the top because this, when I talk about standing with Palestine, it's this guy. This is who's important. People who do not want to live in a state ran by terrorists. People who want to live in a civilized country. This is who we should be standing with. And so, I'm just going to let this air for a minute. I have a comment anyway. But, it's very, very important to understand that this guy stood up for himself, and he did an excellent job of it, and he gave his life for it in protesting against Hamas in Palestine, and that's very important to highlight him and his sacrifice. It's vitally important. Vitally important. Oh no! One of my wonderful. You should listen to this woman's episode. Dixon. So this woman has written a book. I'm not quite sure how I've lost her. I may have to email her later. She wrote a book about it. Her husband was Palestinian. We did a great interview together, and we have talked about this subject extensively. I'm so glad that she's watching. We'll have to email after, Dixie, and talk about this a little bit more, because I'd be interested to hear your perspective on on this, but I still, as I said, I wanted to highlight this young man who has given his life for a good cause against Hamas. And I think the story of the average everyday Palestinian person, like my commenter Dixie Ann Halaj, her husband and her children, that story has always been lost in these conversations. Always, always, always has been left behind. The people who aren't a part of Hamas, the everyday John Q, man on the street, man in public, who has really been a victim kind of both sides. I mean, it's a terrible thing to think that you are living in Gaza or West Bank or a refugee camp or whatever have you, and you've got you really got no friend on your side. You've got Israel on one side who wants to get rid of you. You've got Hamas on the other side to whom you serve a great political purpose, but not much else other than to recruit, sort of thing. There's not necessarily anyone who's really fighting in your corner for you to thrive on the planet. I think that's a quite sad situation, and I don't know all of his politics or what his political motivations were, all this type of thing. But the fact that he was, trying to fight for a better just future for himself deserves highlight. Now, that being said, let's move on. This was a very interesting story, kind of changing a lot of gears towards planning and infrastructure and the state capacity to do things and make society better. Speaking of making society better, this is from, of all places, Reform UK. So the Reform Party in UK is Nigel Farage's party. And one might think, well, Cameron, why on earth are we reading something from Nigel Farage's party? Well, we're going to get into that, because this is an interesting thing to think about. So, the state has been paralyzed by a powerful force, everythingism. Everythingism is the belief that every proposal, project, or policy is a means for promoting every national objective all at the same time. Because of everythingism, we never do any one thing well, we do everything badly. Housing policy becomes the main route for fixing the nitrogen imbalances in local rivers and creating more social housing, the main way of subsidizing the welfare state. Trains must look after bats. Climate policy is to support the services sector. It isn't just that everything is going wrong or that everything needs to be fixed. The problem is that we're relying on everything to fix everything else, everywhere all at once, and so nothing works. Defeating everythingism is a crucial step to rewiring the government and building state capacity, and greater state capacity is essential for solving Britain's problems. Obviously, this is Reform UK, they're talking of Great Britain, given how closely the modern state is intertwined with the levers needed to build a successful future, a growing economy, defense of the nation, and reliable public services. Everythingism, the pathology holding back the state, makes the case for a government which is radically focused on the key policies to delivering its agenda, and rejects a culture which makes every policy responsible for the success of every other policy. And they have a full report sort of thing that's in a PDF. I thought it was interesting about I want to think a little bit of the introduction about this idea that all these things are interconnected and related, and we should, divide those things. And so this is a little bit from the introduction. Let's see what they say. Everythingism is why the government can't have a policy that delivers safe and cheap nuclear power quickly. Britain has some of the highest energy prices in the world, and with increasing geopolitical instability, energy security is a key government priority. But because of everythingism, moving to safe and cheap nuclear power is impossible unless it also promotes the Welsh language, enhances biodiversity, and upskills the local workforce. Everythingism is the belief that every proposal, project, or policy is a means for promoting every national objective all at the same time. Trade policy is not for getting cheaper goods, but for reshaping the global economy. Planning policy is not for getting high-quality housing near the best jobs, but creating local jobs, hiring more apprentices, and enhancing biodiversity. And the government procurement isn't for the best products and services at the cheapest price, it's about promoting social and economic value, reshaping the British economy to promote net zero, regional economic development, and diversity and equality training. Because of everythingism, we never do any one thing well, we do everything badly. Oh, yes, I see where they've taken this part. Creating jobs, reducing pollution, and boosting biodiversity are all laudable policy aims. So, how can pushing them be bad? Because in each example of everythingism, the policy is to deliver those goals through systems which are fundamentally designed with other objectives in mind. The goals aren't always at odds, but often they are. Sometimes that trade off might be worth it, but often it isn't. This isn't a new problem. When governments have failed in the past, the specter of everythingism has been there. Concorde was set up simultaneously to be a joint Anglo-French industrial project, i.e., a demonstration of the most advanced aerospace engineering and commercially viable. The result was a beautiful but financially unsustainable aircraft that only a handful of airlines could use and required massive subsidies just to keep it going. Britain isn't alone in everythingism. In the US, as Recline calls this, everything bagel liberalism, the propensity of policymakers in blue states, especially in leading cities, to see any project as an opportunity to advance multiple goals. Affordable housing projects become unaffordable because of California's insistence on ideas about perfect development, which get in the way of plenty of ones which would be good enough. The security critical semiconductor industry can't build new factories because of the National Environmental Policy Act, or Congress insisting on workforce diversity measures at semiconductor sites in the Inflation Reduction Act. But Britain is also a place where everythingism is deeply rooted, and a profound problem for the country. It isn't just it feels like everything is going wrong or that everything needs to be fixed. The problem is that we're relying on everything to fix everything else, everywhere, all at once. And so, nothing works. And then it goes into how this has manifested itself in different sectors. It talks about it says in the previous conservative government rejected plans for a new data center right next to the M25. That's a highway interstate. They don't call them that. They call them M roads, but think interstate. On the grounds that it would significantly alter the character and appearance of the area. The land is currently a disused quarry next to a major motorway, but its status as part of the green belt makes it easier to justify vetoing new developments. In Bradford, a development to create 140 new homes was delayed because the proposal did not adequately consider the speed of cricket balls. Britain's labyrinthine planning system builds in so many different requirements that it makes it easy for much needed developments to be blocked on the grounds that they disadvantage any one number of different goals. There are 27 kinds of public bodies listed by government guidance as statutory consultees on different kinds of development, each with their own opportunity to add new requirements or request changes to a development. Internationally, we see far more home building and more affordable housing as a result when jurisdictions allow simple processes which don't build in many complex requirements. And it obviously goes on. The report is 24 pages long. And as a concept, I think this is interesting, and I'll tell you why. I think a lot of things do get linked together, but I think that's kind of part of the mess of democracy. Hear me out. When a new development happens or government starts moving, people immediately start to think, well, what's in it for me? California high-speed rail kind of suffered from this. The towns in the valley that the rail was going to pass by on its way from Los Angeles to San Francisco were like, wait a minute, we got to pay for this, but you're not going to stop anywhere near here? Well, we want some stops. We want to get in on this too, sort of thing. And then I think that becomes part of the problem. I think the other half of the problem is you get well-intended but incredibly misguided people who do things without understanding the unintended consequences, like the Argentinian bachelor tax. Argentina tried to tax bachelors to encourage marriage. Women started selling the ability to buy, and the only way you get out of the tax is if a woman had rejected you for marriage. So women started selling the service. Come to me, I'll sign your paperwork that I've rejected you for marriage, you can get out of the tax. It didn't increase marriage, it just, women got a nice little home business out of it. Because incidentally, the government can't force people to marry any faster or slower than they already are or are not. So, you end up with policies that have unintended consequences. There's some of the stuff that I kind of agree with. Like, yeah, like, a train tunnel should consider bats. Especially, if the bats being endangered as they are, and how good they are at keeping down bug populations, if putting a train through is going to, make it difficult for, a population of bats, so the bats going to be living inside the tunnel and getting killed by the train going by, yeah, we probably should do something about that. Now, one might argue we should do something about it after the train's already built. But there are people say, no, maybe we should design it a different way or move the route. Or, I mean, there's different kind of ways to solve that problem. Um, I do, and I think also when it comes to, building the local jobs and, and all this sort of thing, I mean, you can argue whether trying to make it diverse and equitable is a good idea. But it also, I think, when you're wanting to build something new or do new trade policy, people are going to immediately be kind of like, okay, well, that's great. What's in it for me? Am I going to get a new job? Are my kids going to get great jobs? Is there going to be, a new opportunities opening up? Or is it just going to go to the same old people doing the same old thing? You're going to import workers and we'll have the new thing, but it's not going to really benefit me. I think that's where a lot of this stuff comes from and especially when you get to some of these ancillary social issues like promoting the Welsh language or whatever have you, I think a lot of that is trying to use these projects to hang on and preserve things that wouldn't necessarily otherwise be considered. I think that's kind of the point. Like, that's kind of the point of democracy. That's kind of the point of these conversations. I think it gets couched, and you kind of see in their report how they do this. It's liberals are just tacking on unnecessarily stuff, and it's holding Britain back. It's holding America back. All this sort of thing. Rather than, and I think the view, and that I kind of agree with, is using those things, to encourage the type of society you want to live in. Now, do I think that sometimes we get lost in the sauce on bureaucracy and there's way too much planning permission required for a lot of things? Yeah, probably. I think that honestly makes sense in a country like Great Britain, where you have 68 million people living in a country about the size of Florida. I think it also is, in this country at the local level, I think a lot of people, they like their town. They kind of like things the way they are. They're worried about new traffic. Those concerns are real. I think the unfortunate part is that it oftentimes blocks the development and growth that needs to happen. I think in big cities it's about criminal. I think people, are like, yeah, that's cool, but I don't want it to affect my life or my lifestyle. That's why I moved here. That's what I paid for, all this type of thing. In this country, there's also an aspect of racism to it, which is always fun. I think part of the problem is just democracy. Everyone's like, how does China get this done? Well, they kill anyone who gets in their way. When you own all the land and you can kill the people sitting on it, it's real easy to build a train route. When you don't care about your environment, as China does not, it's real easy to do stuff. And that's how we used to do things in this country. That's how Britain used to do things. And we saw the terrible consequences of that. And this even gets into, like, last week we were talking about the abundance agenda, where, it's like, yeah, we need to build things, we need to expand, all this sort of thing. There's a lot of liberals being like, but this is just more neoliberal policies. This is just saying, oh yeah, let's grow the economy, let's build, and let's not care about the environment, let's not care about all of these things that we used to care about in the laws we put in place in the 70s. Let's just build, and grow, with a complete disregard for who it benefits. Is it actually helping anyone, or is it just reinforcing the same old systems over and over and over again in favor of just line go up? And I think it's very interesting how we're having this debate right now. And I was reading a thread from someone who was from Singapore. They traveled to China, and they're talking about all the wonderful, technological innovations in China. And I think there's a real struggle right now of, it kind of feels like as in the West, we're kind of falling behind. We aren't building, we aren't, taking advantage of all the opportunities right now and really, causing the growth and expansion that we really should be. And we're kind of, stuck in this financialized economy where economic growth is increasingly concentrated in the hands of the few rather than the hands of the many. And that, everything is just falling apart. And when we try to actually go and fix it, have so many barriers to actually do anything that it seems easier to just not do it at all, or it's not cost effective to do it at all. And I think what we're seeing the pushback against that. But I think people are also forgetting, what are you going to do with the people left behind? Okay, you open a new factory, but if you're not going to focus on employing local people, will local people not be unhappy that they're seeing growth but it's not benefiting them? I mean, I think that's the conversation that needs to be had is how do we, if we're going to do all this new growth and new development, how does it actually benefit the everyday person? And I think people are tired of being left behind. I mean, that was one of the problems with globalization. That's why Trump is doing his tariffs and is reshaping the global economy. He, the fruits of globalization have done very, very well for the top 5% of this country. And there was a debate on Twitter this morning about that. Done very, very well for the top 5% of this country. It has not been great for almost everyone else. Who's watched their jobs go away, who's seen hulking factories in their town go to rust. It has, it has not been a lot, it has not been really great for the vast majority of people. And you can say, well, we've become a services and information economy. Yeah, that doesn't pay the same or have the same stability or the same upward mobility potential of a manufacturing or industrialized economy. Now, personally speaking, I think us trying to get back into manufacturing in a big way is not going to be helpful because of automation. The days of 6,000 people showing up to a building to build stuff is over. And with AI and these new robots and these new manufacturing processes, it's going to be even worse. But it's that's trying to actually make sure that this stuff reaches people, real everyday people, and isn't just concentrated in the hands of the few, I think is the point. So I get their point with everythingism. I think it's interesting. I don't necessarily think that we should throw all caution to the wind, if that makes sense. So let's, okay. I'm not going to talk about this for very long because the person hid the original post because it turned into discourse. So, when I first read this post, it was about this kind of meltdown, and it was talking about kids trying to get into these elite schools, and this idea that for a lot of kids now, that if they don't get into an elite school, they are screwed for life. And this person had posted from Reddit, this kid who had not gotten into MIT and had to go to his backup schools, and he felt like he was never going to be able to get married or buy a house because he wasn't going to the best institution despite a great SAT score, a great GPA, all this type of thing, doing coding, doing math, checking all the boxes, taking every AP course, doing all this type of thing. And I kind of got into a back and forth with people, and this person first replied and said, I agree with this attitude seems to be increasingly prevalent, i.e. this idea that if you're not in the elite, you're screwed. And I don't understand it. And I was trying to explain that, having gone to a second tier state school for my undergrad myself and then doing elite graduate programs, it's a very different experience. And one of the points I made was, certainly, but the gulf is widening. They had said, oh yeah, I doubt that there's a pretty huge difference between reaching the utmost pinnacle of elite inner circles and having nothing. And it says, but certainly the gulf is widening. Getting into an elite school opens doors and income opportunities that really matter. As someone who's struggled along, I get what he's talking about. Are there other opportunities? Yes. Will those opportunities offer the life of an IT grad? No. And they replied and said, again, I don't doubt that at all. It's the hyperbole. And the fact that many young people seem to have internalized it is literally true that I object to. There are millions and millions of people who by any objective measure are doing quite well and didn't attend elite schools. And I get that. I think that's there's something to that. There's probably a lot to that. However, what I think is very interesting is I think this perception that if you want to go places, you got to go to the top, and those opportunities are scarcer than they used to be. That's kind of the first problem. And then the second problem, that people don't understand, how high stakes society is. And I've said this since I was in my 20s. And I was saying like, oh yeah, it because I was raised in a world where you went to school didn't matter. You get the degree, you collect it, you go get your job and go from there. The last time it matters where you went to school will be the day you graduate. I didn't realize how incredibly untrue that was and how actually terrible advice it was. So I've understood kind of where it's coming from at all. And I think the reality is in a society where inequality is growing farther and farther apart and the standards are higher and higher, and some kids are kind of like, okay, I'm going to try to go straight to the top sort of thing. and they tick all the boxes and don't get any result. That's part of the reason why young people are so pessimistic today. I mean, that's right with my generation. And even as Peter Zine says, the problem with millennials is we asked them to do everything. They actually did it, and then we spin their eye. You know, we didn't. The millennials have never gotten the actual full payback we were due for having less sex, smoking less, drinking less, going to school, all this type of thing. All the messages we were told, we did all of the things and got nothing. And this is even now going on to Gen Z, where, you know, they're also trying to tick the boxes and do all the things, and they're not getting a result and a payback for it. And that leads to young people who are apathetic. You want to know why young people are apathetic today? Because you can do wonderful things and get nowhere. Some people will say, yeah, well, that's life. Welcome to the planet Earth. And you're not wrong. I'm old enough. I'm turning 37 in less than a month. I'm old enough to say you're not wrong. But the fact that there's not an accessible sort of second tier, third tier, we're in the you are elite or you are everyone else, I think makes a lot of people feel like, oh great, I'm going to end up with everyone else, struggling along, wondering if I'm ever going to get married, buy a house, afford to live, actually have a good life, all this type of thing. This is what happened. In an earlier other tweet, I mentioned this is Brazilization, where you have a small group at the top who is doing really well, and everyone else barely getting by. This is what a lot of, especially kind of second tier income countries. This is what Mexico's like. This is what Brazil is like. This is what South Africa's like. You know, this is the whole idea of having, a middle class that is, isn't rich but is doing okay, sort of thing, is something that is unique in human history, certainly, but was something worth saving and preserving. We've thrown it away. And now you've got young people crashing out because they might have to go to Penn, and they don't know if they're going to be able to live a great life. That wasn't true a generation ago. That's a terrible change. And it's a proxy for how people view society now. If you're not in up there, you're struggling down with everybody else. And I'm reminded of this book I read called Techno-Feudalism. And when I was replying to this thread this morning, I was kind of like, yeah, there it is. There's the start of that sort of techno-feudalism attitude that is all becoming all too pervasive in society. All right, let's move on. This is the ProPublica article I wanted to get to, and then we'll talk about shells and a great story from Storage Cafe. ProPublica on Elon Musk and SpaceX and allowing Chinese investment. So, it says here, as a U.S. military contractor, SpaceX sees allowing Chinese ownership as fraught, but it will allow the investment if it comes through a secrecy hubs like the Cayman Islands, court records say. It is certainly a policy of obfuscation. Elon Musk's aerospace giant SpaceX allows investors from China to buy stakes in the company as long as the funds are routed through the Cayman Islands or other offshore secrecy hubs, according to previously unreported court records. The rare picture of SpaceX's approach recently emerged in an under-the-radar corporate dispute in Delaware. Both SpaceX chief's financial officer and Iqbalijit Kalon, a major investor, were forced to testify in the case. In December, Kalon testified that SpaceX prefers to avoid investors from China because it's a defense contractor. There is a major exception, though, he said. SpaceX finds it acceptable for Chinese investors to buy into the company through offshore vehicles. Quote, the primary mechanism is that those investors would come through intermediate entities that they would create or others would create, unquote, Kalon said. Quote, typically they would set up BVI structures or Cayman structures or Hong Kong structures and various other ones, unquote, he added, using the acronym for the British Virgin Islands. Offshore vehicles are often used to keep investors anonymous. Experts called SpaceX's approach unusual, saying they were troubled by the possibility that a defense contractor would take active steps to conceal foreign ownership interests. Kalon, who's long been close to the company's leadership, has said he owns billions of dollars of SpaceX stock. His investment firm also acts as a middleman, raising money from investors to buy highly sought SpaceX shares. He has routed money from China through the Caribbean to buy stakes in SpaceX multiple times, according to the court filings. The legal dispute centers on an aborted 2021 deal when SpaceX executives grew angry after news broke that a Chinese firm was going to buy $50 million of the company's stock. SpaceX then had the purchase canceled. In separate testimony, the rocket company's CFO explained that the media coverage was, quote, not helpful for our company as a government contractor, unquote. SpaceX's business is built on those contracts, with the U.S. government paying the company billions to handle sensitive work like building a classified spy satellite network. Company executives were concerned that the coverage of the deal could lead to problems with national security regulators in the U.S., according to Kalon's testimony and a filing from his attorneys. SpaceX, which also launches rockets for NASA and sells satellite internet service, is perhaps the most important pillar of Musk's fortune. His estimated 42% stake in the company is valued at around $150 billion. If he owned nothing else, he'd still be richer than Bill Gates. Federal law gives regulators broad power to oversee foreign investments in tech companies and defense contractors. Companies only have to proactively report Chinese investments in limited circumstances, and there aren't hard and fast rules of how much is too much. However, the government can initiate investigations and then block or reverse transactions they deem a national security threat. That authority typically does not apply to purely passive investments, in which a foreign investor is buying only a small slice of a company. But experts said that federal officials regularly ask companies to add up Chinese investments into an aggregate total. The U.S. government charges that China has a systematic strategy of using even minority investments to secure leverage over companies in sensitive industries, as well as to gain privileged access to information about cutting-edge technology. U.S. regulators view even private investors in China as potential agents of the country's government, experts said. The new materials do not contain allegations that Chinese investments in SpaceX would violate the law or were directed by the Chinese government. The company did not respond to detailed questions from ProPublica. Kalon declined to comment on the reasons for SpaceX's approach. And it goes on to really, honestly, really deep reporting. And it also, obviously, this also gets into Elon's relationship with mainland China, our situation in Taiwan. It mentioned Musk's business interests in China extend far beyond SpaceX's ownership structure, a fact that has drawn criticism from Republican lawmakers over the years. In 2022, after Tesla opened a showroom in the Chinese region where the government runs Uyghur internment camps, then Senator Marco Rubio tweeted, "Nationless corporations are helping the Chinese Communist Party cover up genocide," unquote. In addition to Tesla's sprawling factory in Shanghai last year, almost 40% of Tesla's sales were to Chinese customers. The company has also secured major tax breaks and regulatory victories on the country. In 2019, the Chinese premier offered Musk the country's equivalent of a green card. In recent years, the billionaire has offered sympathetic remarks about China's desire to reclaim Taiwan and lavish praise on the government. Quote, "My experience within the government of China is that they actually are very responsive to the people," unquote, Musk said towards the end of Trump's first term. In fact, possibly more responsive to the happiness of people than in the U.S. So, obviously it's kind of interesting that, Mr. America First, when it comes to investing in his rockets, is not so America First. And not that this is a scandal or a story, or there's anything illegal going on. Is it shady? Yes. Is it illegal? Probably not. But defense contractors are very limited in what they can do in terms of foreign investment and who has a stake in ownership and all this sort of thing. And it's not surprising that China's taking an interest in SpaceX. They have cutting into technology that China does not have. No surprise there. But given Elon's closeness to the president, given just the whole situation, the Chinese government probably has quite a bit of leverage, and if they should ever choose to use it, we would all be in a great deal of trouble. And that should be concerning to everyone. Again, this isn't necessarily too crazy, routing money through investment vehicles and all this sort of thing, but when the Chinese are involved, everyone has to be concerned. Speaking of China and war, so this this was some fun dialogue over the weekend. So while my computer was broken and I was sitting around contemplating my life, this really cool video um was, yeah, the sound is loud. This really cool video was kind of being passed around on showing production of 155 millimeter shells in the U.S. This actually isn't production. This is refurbishment. There's a community note. This is Bluegrass Army Depot in February of 2020. They're refurbishing the old M549A1 high explosive rocket assisted projectiles, which have not been in production for many years, and these are just getting refurbished. But the dialogue, the discourse, was about how, oh my god, we're making shells by hand. There's a man here painting a shell by hand. What is that, a hand stencil? This needs to be automated. Is there no production technology? And that, that literally is how this started. I know we're only seeing a small slice of the production process, but how is this all manual? How's it not a robot arm? Like, all this type of thing. It's and someone was kind of like, well, yeah, our military doctrine does not rely on artillery, therefore we don't make a lot of it. And and it's, and people, there's all sorts of different things, but it's the main point is that these shells are not being made new, they're being refurbished. But speaking of the whole idea that our manufacturing processes are just behind, and we've deindustrialized, and we're inefficient, and we've got to get to work at being more efficient, and and we need everything needs to be automated and have a robot and all this sort of thing, is this all went to the left around this video. And the only reason I wanted to highlight it is because, one, I think it's really interesting to see how these things are done. Two, good that we're refurbishing these shells, this video's old, from 2020. And two, it's very interesting to kind of see how that process goes along. It does, I will say though, despite the fact that this video is not a source of the problem, it is very interesting to me that one of the main issues with the war in Ukraine is that we only produce about 10,000 of these shells, newer ones. These are old, these are out of production, but newer shells, we only produce about 10,000 a month, and 16,000 a month, and Ukraine goes through 10,000. So we've had to actually give them from our stores and stocks because it's taken a while to bring up production. And people have remarked that modern munitions production is led by people in their 50s. A lot of Gen X's, a lot of boomers. You don't see a lot of younger workers. And a lot of our munitions factories have not been updated since World War II. So the mood of this post is not correct about this specific video, but overall they are correct. We are a bit behind. It is time probably to modernize a lot of this. If you want to see really modern arms manufacturing, go check out how we make missiles. We don't use a lot of artillery, so we don't make a lot of artillery shells, but we do use a lot of missiles, and we make a lot of those. And the Tomahawk and the Patriot missile assembly lines are very, very automated sort of thing. This just isn't, because these shells are being remade. But I thought the discourse was very interesting. This got shared around a lot. And this was kind of what the weekend was talking about, and it was just kind of an interesting thing to kind of read through and read people's reaction, and how people were kind of freaking out over nothing. Again, another tempest in a teapot. Now, for my final story, I don't really partner with Storage Cafe, but I'm on their press list, and I love their stories because they do a lot of interesting stories about apartment and storage units and all this type of thing. And I found it very interesting that apartments, by and large, are shrinking. Let's read. The best cities for spacious apartments with walk-in closets and storage are mostly in the South. My old apartment in Delaware had a wonderful walk-in closet, and I miss it so much. Fayetteville, North Carolina ranks as the top U.S. city for roomy apartments and abundant storage options. Storage-friendly apartments are hardest to find on the East Coast, where smaller living spaces are limited and storage prevail. True. The average apartment size delivered in 2024 was 907 square feet, down 70 square feet from 2005, roughly the size of a walk-in closet. See, this is where we need to make America great again. Give America walk-in closets again. The self-storage industry has nearly doubled in inventory over 2 decades, reaching close to 2 billion square feet by the end of 2024. Home is where our stuff is, but where do we put it all? With our love for retail therapy and non-essential spending going up by a third in recent years, chances are our homes are overflowing with stuff. But this isn't just about consumer habits. The housing crunch has also forced cities to find new ways to accommodate growing populations. To make room for more residents, apartments have been getting smaller over the past 2 decades. In 2024, new rentals averaged 907 square feet, about 70 square feet less than those delivered in 2005. On average, the American apartment is now short by roughly the size of a walk-in closet. With less space at home and more stuff than ever, the question remains, where can renters still live comfortably without sacrificing the items they hold dear? Across the country, cities have evolved in different ways to accommodate renters' space needs. Some prioritize dense, compact living, while others still offer room to breathe. With that in mind, we set out to explore where renters can enjoy spacious, uncluttered living while still embracing an urban lifestyle. Of course, having room to breathe isn't just about square footage, it's about how well space is used. Smart storage solutions can make all the difference in apartment living. Features like walk-in closets, built-in storage, and access to self-storage help maximize every inch, turning a compact layout into a functional home. In some cities, renters have a much better chance of finding these space-saving perks. To pinpoint where renters can still enjoy area apartment living, our Storage Cafe research team analyzed 243 cities, each with at least 2,000 renters. And we ranked them based on apartment size, the availability of walk-in closets and built-in storage, and access to self-storage, an essential tool for keeping homes organized and clutter-free. And they found the winners are all in the South, 2 of them in North Carolina, Murfreesboro, Tennessee, Florida, Tennessee, Alabama, Florida, Tennessee, Virginia, and North Carolina. So, if you want a big apartment, move to the South. That's kind of the moral of the story here. With the best score being Fayetteville and the worst being, no surprise, Miami. DC's up here as well. Different things like that. So it was an interesting idea and study. I was very lucky in my last place to have enough space I did not need storage, but Lord knows I've had plenty of storage units in the past. And I mean, honestly, the space factor, I think, is why people are moving to the Sun Belt. And yeah, see, it shows here that when it comes to average size, if you get into New York, New Jersey, California, Connecticut, Massachusetts, it's just shrink. And closets are down, storage, is, all this sort of thing, with Miami kind of being the worst at 692. You even get a little bit more in New York. And so it's, yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting sort of thing. But I think honestly, the room and, more room for less price is definitely part of why, part of the reason why the Sun Belt is so popular, and why, especially Texas, people are just pouring into Texas for, obviously, more space, the weather, lower housing prices. So that is no secret as well. So excellent. Well, thank you all for coming along this evening. We had a nice group this evening and a nice set of stories. I am going to go collapse in a corner because it's been that type of day. So my name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal News Hour. If you want to follow me on social media, they're all in my profile wherever you may watching. At Cameron Cowan on Instagram and Twitter. At Cameron Journal on TikTok and Blue Sky. And at Cameron L. Cowan on Facebook. And I will see you guys next week. There will be a very long newsletter on Saturday to catch up for missing one on this Saturday. And I will see you next Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern. So thanks much, guys. Have a great night. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.